Question 1. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern of unusual transactions initiated by a key client, raising concerns about potential money laundering activities. As a junior analyst, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Discuss the suspicious activity with colleagues in other departments to gauge their opinions. Option B. Discreetly escalate the concerns to the firm's compliance department or designated supervisor for further investigation. Option C. Immediately report the suspicious transactions to the relevant financial intelligence unit. Option D. Confront the client directly to inquire about the nature of these transactions. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the suspicious transactions to the relevant financial intelligence unit. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between maintaining client confidentiality and the obligation to report potential financial misconduct. The Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam, in its regulatory framework, emphasizes ethical conduct and adherence to professional standards. Therefore, careful judgment is required to balance these competing interests. The correct approach involves discreetly escalating the concern through established internal channels, such as the compliance department or a designated supervisor, without directly confronting the client or disclosing confidential information prematurely. This aligns with professional ethical codes that mandate reporting suspicious activities while also upholding client trust. The regulatory framework for business ethics, as implicitly understood within the context of a commerce school entrance exam, prioritizes integrity and responsible corporate behavior. Escalating internally allows for formal investigation by trained personnel who can assess the situation objectively and determine the appropriate course of action in accordance with relevant laws and internal policies, thereby protecting both the firm and its clients. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the suspicious activity. Failure to act would violate professional duties to maintain vigilance against financial irregularities and could expose the firm to significant legal and reputational risks. It also undermines the integrity of the financial system. Another incorrect approach is to directly confront the client with accusations. This action breaches client confidentiality, potentially jeopardizes the investigation, and could lead to legal repercussions for the firm. It bypasses the established procedures for handling such sensitive matters. Finally, disclosing the suspicion to unauthorized third parties without proper investigation or authorization is also an unacceptable approach. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and could have severe legal and ethical consequences, damaging client relationships and the firm's reputation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the potential ethical or regulatory issue. This is followed by gathering relevant facts, consulting internal policies and professional codes of conduct, and seeking guidance from supervisors or compliance officers. The ultimate decision should prioritize adherence to ethical principles and regulatory requirements while minimizing harm. Question 2. The monitoring system demonstrates a candidate exhibiting unusual cursor movement and prolonged periods of inactivity during a critical section of the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam. Considering the school's commitment to fair assessment and the integrity of its entrance process, which of the following actions best reflects a professional and ethically sound response? Option A. Temporarily pause the candidate's exam and require them to undergo a live proctoring session to explain their behavior. Option B. Immediately flag the candidate for disqualification based on the observed anomalies, as the monitoring system is designed to detect potential misconduct. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the candidate's entire exam session, cross-referencing the observed anomalies with the specific exam protocols and known patterns of legitimate exam-taking behavior before any further action is considered. Option D. Ignore the anomalies, assuming they are due to technical glitches or personal circumstances, to avoid potentially penalizing a candidate unfairly. The correct answer is B. Immediately flag the candidate for disqualification based on the observed anomalies, as the monitoring system is designed to detect potential misconduct. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for robust internal controls and compliance with the principles of fairness and due process for individuals within the organization. The Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam, like many professional assessments, emphasizes ethical conduct and adherence to established procedures. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and applying the school's internal regulations regarding monitoring and data privacy in a way that is both effective for assessment integrity and respectful of candidate rights. Careful judgment is required to avoid overreach or misinterpretation of monitoring capabilities. The correct approach involves a measured and transparent use of the monitoring system, focusing on identifying clear deviations from exam protocols as defined by the Amiens Higher School of Commerce's entrance exam guidelines. This approach is justified by the principle of proportionality and the ethical obligation to conduct assessments fairly. The school's regulations, as understood within the context of a competitive entrance examination, implicitly permit monitoring to ensure the integrity of the process. However, this permission is not absolute and must be exercised within the bounds of what is necessary and proportionate to the objective of preventing cheating. Transparency about the monitoring's existence and purpose, even if not detailing its every function, is crucial for maintaining trust and upholding ethical standards. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical capabilities of the monitoring system, without considering the specific rules of the entrance exam or the ethical implications of data collection, would be professionally unacceptable. This would represent a failure to adhere to the spirit of the exam's regulations, which are designed to assess candidates on their merit, not to subject them to intrusive surveillance beyond what is strictly necessary for fairness. Another incorrect approach, which might involve immediate punitive action based on ambiguous data without further investigation or opportunity for the candidate to respond, would violate principles of natural justice and due process. Such an approach would fail to acknowledge that monitoring data can be subject to misinterpretation and that a fair assessment process requires thoroughness and impartiality. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established rules and ethical principles. This involves 1. Clearly understanding the specific regulations governing the assessment and the monitoring tools. 2. Assessing the potential impact of any observed anomaly on the integrity of the exam. 3. Considering the proportionality of any proposed action relative to the observed issue. 4. Ensuring transparency and fairness in the process, including providing individuals with an opportunity to explain any perceived irregularities. 5. Seeking guidance from relevant authorities or legal counsel if there is ambiguity in the regulations or the situation. Question 3. The monitoring system demonstrates an increase in the collection of student activity data within the school's digital learning environment. Considering the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines expected of an institution like the Amiens Higher School of Commerce, which of the following represents the most responsible and compliant course of action? Option A. Expand the monitoring system to include personal device usage on school networks, citing general security concerns without specific incident justification. Option B. Develop a clear policy outlining the purpose, scope, and limitations of the monitoring system. Communicate this policy transparently to all students and staff, and establish strict access controls for the collected data. Option C. Immediately implement enhanced data collection protocols and analyze all collected data to identify potential policy violations without prior notification to students. Option D. Continue with the current level of data collection, assuming that increased data automatically equates to improved security and compliance. Correct answer is C. Immediately implement enhanced data collection protocols and analyze all collected data to identify potential policy violations without prior notification to students. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for robust internal controls and compliance with the potential for overreach and the erosion of trust within an organization. The Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam, like many professional training programs, emphasizes ethical conduct and adherence to established guidelines. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and applying the school's specific regulatory framework, which would govern data privacy, employee conduct, and the use of monitoring technologies. A key aspect is understanding the boundaries of acceptable monitoring, ensuring it is proportionate, transparent, and serves a legitimate purpose without infringing on individual rights or creating a climate of suspicion. Correct approach involves a nuanced understanding of the school's internal regulations and any applicable French data protection laws, e.g., GDPR as implemented in France. It requires a proactive and transparent communication strategy. This approach prioritizes informing all stakeholders about the monitoring system, its purpose, the data collected, and how it will be used, while also establishing clear protocols for data access and retention. This aligns with principles of fairness, accountability, and data minimization, which are fundamental to ethical data handling and are likely emphasized in the Amiens Higher School of Commerce's curriculum. Transparency builds trust and ensures that monitoring serves its intended purpose without becoming a tool for undue surveillance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing data collection without clear justification or communication would fail to uphold ethical standards and potentially violate data protection regulations. This could lead to a breach of trust among students and staff, negatively impacting the school's reputation and operational effectiveness. Another incorrect approach, which involves using the collected data for purposes not disclosed to stakeholders, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This lack of transparency and potential misuse of information undermines the principles of informed consent and data integrity. A third incorrect approach, which involves implementing the monitoring system without any clear policy or oversight, creates ambiguity and increases the risk of arbitrary or discriminatory application, thereby failing to meet the standards of good governance and ethical practice expected by an institution like the Amiens Higher School of Commerce. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of all relevant internal policies and external regulations. It requires consulting with legal and compliance departments, conducting a risk assessment to identify potential ethical and legal pitfalls, and developing a clear communication plan to ensure all stakeholders are informed. The principle of proportionality, ensuring that the monitoring is no more intrusive than necessary to achieve its stated objectives, should guide all decisions. Question 4. Governance review demonstrates that a candidate's submitted essay for the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam bears striking similarities to published academic work. The review committee must determine the appropriate course of action. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and procedurally sound response, strictly adhering to the exam's regulatory framework? Option A. Consult with other admissions committees from different institutions to gauge their typical response to similar situations. Option B. Initiate a formal investigation, gathering all evidence of the alleged plagiarism and providing the candidate with an opportunity to respond before making a decision based on the exam's academic integrity policy. Option C. Dismiss the similarities as minor stylistic resemblances and proceed with the candidate's application without further inquiry. Option D. Immediately disqualify the candidate based on the observed similarities, assuming plagiarism. The correct answer is D. Immediately disqualify the candidate based on the observed similarities, assuming plagiarism. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in business education where a student's academic integrity is questioned due to potential plagiarism. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need to uphold academic standards and the school's reputation with fairness to the student. The Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam regulations, as the governing framework, dictate the process for handling such allegations, emphasizing due process and evidence-based decision-making. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to unfair outcomes, damage the school's credibility, and potentially lead to legal challenges. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, impartial investigation, strictly adhering to the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exams, established procedures for academic misconduct. This means gathering all relevant evidence, including the submitted work and any suspected sources, and providing the student with a clear opportunity to respond to the allegations. The decision must be based solely on the evidence and the specific definitions of plagiarism and academic dishonesty outlined in the exam's regulatory framework. This approach ensures fairness, transparency, and adherence to the school's stated policies, thereby protecting the integrity of the examination process. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that immediately dismisses the student's application without a formal investigation or allowing them to present their case fails to adhere to the principles of due process mandated by the exam's regulations. This is a procedural failure and an ethical lapse, as it presumes guilt without evidence. An approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the subjective opinion of an examiner without concrete proof of plagiarism as defined by the regulations is also procedurally flawed. This can lead to arbitrary decisions and undermine the credibility of the examination process. An approach that seeks to minimize the issue to avoid administrative burden, even if plagiarism is suspected, violates the school's commitment to academic integrity. This is an ethical failure that compromises the educational standards the school aims to uphold. Professional reasoning. Professionals in academic admissions and examination boards must adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach. This involves 1. Understanding and strictly applying the relevant regulatory framework, in this case, the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam regulations. 2. Gathering objective evidence. 3. Ensuring fair process for all parties involved, including the right to be heard. 4. Making decisions based on established criteria and policies, not on personal bias or expediency. 5. Documenting all steps and decisions thoroughly. Question 5. The risk matrix shows a potential vulnerability in the digital submission portal for the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam, specifically concerning the integrity of applicant data during upload. A candidate, having observed this, is considering how to best address this finding. Option A. Attempt to independently verify the vulnerability by probing the submission portal's security features to gather more detailed evidence. Option B. Discuss the observed vulnerability with other candidates to gauge their awareness and potential impact on the exam's fairness. Option C. Immediately report the observed vulnerability to the exam administration through the designated official channels, requesting clarification on the school's protocol for addressing such risks. Option D. Ignore the finding as it is outside the scope of a candidate's responsibilities during the entrance exam process. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the observed vulnerability to the exam administration through the designated official channels, requesting clarification on the school's protocol for addressing such risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect sensitive data. The Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam, like many professional institutions, operates under strict guidelines regarding data privacy and the responsible use of information. A risk matrix, by its nature, highlights potential threats and vulnerabilities, demanding a proactive and compliant response. The correct approach involves a structured, authorized, and transparent process for accessing and utilizing the information presented in the risk matrix. This aligns with best practices in data governance and information security, which are implicitly expected of candidates seeking admission to a business school. Specifically, it requires adhering to the school's internal policies and any relevant French data protection regulations, such as those derived from GDPR, as applied within the French context. This approach ensures that any investigation into the identified risks is conducted ethically, legally, and without compromising the integrity of the examination process or the privacy of individuals. It prioritizes due diligence and a systematic review of potential issues, ensuring that any actions taken are justifiable and documented. An incorrect approach that involves directly accessing and analyzing the raw data without proper authorization or a defined protocol is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This could be construed as unauthorized access to sensitive information, a breach of data privacy principles, and a violation of the trust placed in candidates. Such actions could lead to disciplinary measures, including disqualification from the entrance exam, and potentially have broader professional repercussions. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the identified risks due to a lack of immediate understanding, fails to meet the professional expectation of proactive risk management and due diligence. It demonstrates a lack of critical thinking and a disregard for potential vulnerabilities that could impact the integrity of the examination. Professionals faced with such a situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols and ethical guidelines. This involves 1. Identifying the nature of the information and its potential implications. 2. Consulting relevant institutional policies and regulatory frameworks. 3. Seeking guidance from appropriate authorities or supervisors if clarification is needed. 4. Acting only within authorized parameters and with transparency. 5. Documenting all actions taken. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and uphold the highest standards of professional conduct. Question 6. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent and predictable pattern in the trading behavior of a specific cohort of simulated investors, suggesting a potential for arbitrage that could be exploited by the institution managing the simulation. Option A. Disseminate the observed pattern to all participants in the simulation, allowing them to benefit equally from the identified arbitrage. Option B. Utilize the identified arbitrage opportunity to generate a simulated profit for the institution, citing the monitoring system's effectiveness. Option C. Immediately adjust the simulation's parameters to eliminate the arbitrage opportunity, thereby preventing any potential exploitation by the institution. Option D. Report the observed pattern to the relevant academic oversight committee for review and guidance on how to proceed ethically and in accordance with the principles of fair simulation management. The correct answer is D. Report the observed pattern to the relevant academic oversight committee for review and guidance on how to proceed ethically and in accordance with the principles of fair simulation management. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between maintaining a competitive edge through proprietary information and the ethical obligation to ensure fair market practices. The Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam, in its regulatory framework, emphasizes integrity and responsible business conduct. Therefore, any action that could be construed as market manipulation or unfair advantage, even if not explicitly illegal under a specific French commercial code provision, as the exam focuses on principles rather than exhaustive legal citation, would be ethically unsound and detrimental to the school's reputation and the principles it upholds. The correct approach involves a measured and transparent response that prioritizes ethical conduct and market fairness. This means acknowledging the potential for information asymmetry without exploiting it. The school, as an institution of higher learning and a gatekeeper of future business leaders, must act with utmost integrity. This involves a commitment to fair competition and avoiding any action that could be perceived as insider trading or market manipulation, even in a simulated or educational context. The regulatory framework for such exams implicitly demands adherence to principles of honesty, transparency, and fairness in all dealings, especially those that could influence perceptions of market value or competitive advantage. An incorrect approach would be to immediately leverage the observed trend for the school's direct financial gain, or to disseminate the information in a way that unfairly benefits specific parties. Such actions would violate the fundamental ethical principles of fair play and could be interpreted as market manipulation, undermining the integrity of the educational environment and the principles of responsible business that the Amiens Higher School of Commerce aims to instill. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the observation entirely, as this could be seen as a dereliction of duty if the monitoring system is intended to identify and address potential market irregularities or ethical breaches within the scope of the exam simulation. Failing to act responsibly when a potential issue is identified, even if it doesn't directly involve illegal activity, can still represent an ethical failure in a professional context. The professional decision-making process in such a situation should involve a careful assessment of the potential impact of any action or inaction. This includes considering the ethical implications, the potential for reputational damage, and adherence to the overarching principles of integrity and fairness that are paramount in business education. Professionals should always err on the side of caution when dealing with information that could confer an unfair advantage, prioritizing transparency and ethical conduct over short-term gains. Question 7. The efficiency study reveals that a member of the Amiens Higher School of Commerce Admissions Committee has a child who is an applicant, and this member has been involved in the review of applications. Which of the following actions best upholds the principles of fairness and integrity in the admissions process? Option A. The committee member immediately discloses their relationship to the applicant and recuses themselves from all aspects of the admissions process pertaining to that applicant and any other applicant with a similar profile. Option B. The committee member continues to participate in the review process, but makes a conscious effort to be more objective in their evaluations of all applicants. Option C. The committee member decides to abstain from voting on their child's application, but remains involved in the discussion and review of other applications. Option D. The committee member discloses their relationship to the applicant, but continues to participate in the review process, believing their professional judgment is unaffected. The correct answer is A. The committee member immediately discloses their relationship to the applicant and recuses themselves from all aspects of the admissions process pertaining to that applicant and any other applicant with a similar profile. Explanation: the efficiency study reveals a potential conflict of interest within the Amiens Higher School of Commerce's admissions committee. A committee member's child is applying for admission, and this member has been actively involved in reviewing applications, including those from candidates with similar profiles to their child. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly tests the integrity of the admissions process and the ethical obligations of committee members. The need for impartiality and fairness is paramount in such a high-stakes decision-making environment. The correct approach involves immediate disclosure of the conflict of interest and recusal from any decision-making processes directly or indirectly affecting the applicant. This aligns with the principles of transparency and fairness expected in academic institutions. Specifically, within the framework of French higher education regulations and ethical guidelines for academic institutions, such as those implicitly followed by the Amiens Higher School of Commerce. Maintaining objectivity is a core requirement. The member's involvement, even if perceived as unbiased, creates an appearance of impropriety that can undermine trust in the admissions process. Recusal ensures that the decision is made by individuals without a personal stake, upholding the principle of equal opportunity for all applicants. An incorrect approach would be to continue participating in the review process while attempting to be extra objective. This fails to address the inherent bias, however unintentional, and the perception of unfairness it creates. Ethically, it violates the duty to avoid conflicts of interest and maintain impartiality. Another incorrect approach would be to only disclose the conflict but not recuse oneself, believing that their objectivity is sufficient. This still leaves room for doubt and potential challenges to the fairness of the admissions decision, as the member's influence, however subtle, remains. Furthermore, it fails to fully uphold the principle of avoiding situations that could reasonably be perceived as compromising integrity. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore the conflict entirely and proceed as normal. This is a clear breach of ethical conduct and potentially regulatory guidelines concerning conflicts of interest, leading to a compromised admissions process and damage to the institution's reputation. Professionals in similar situations should follow a clear decision-making framework. 1. Identify potential conflicts of interest. 2. Immediately disclose the conflict to the relevant authority, e.g., admissions director, ethics committee. 3. Recuse oneself from any discussions or decisions related to the matter where the conflict exists. 4. Cooperate with any subsequent review or investigation. This structured approach ensures that ethical standards are maintained and the integrity of the institution's processes is preserved. Question 8. The monitoring system demonstrates a statistically significant increase in the similarity of submitted assignments across multiple courses, raising concerns about potential plagiarism and academic misconduct among students applying for admission to the Amiens Higher School of Commerce. The admissions committee must decide how to proceed. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and ethically sound course of action? Option A. Immediately reject all applications from students whose submitted work triggered the monitoring system's alerts to safeguard the school's reputation. Option B. Issue a general warning to all applicants about the importance of academic integrity without investigating specific cases to avoid potential controversy. Option C. Focus on the overall quality of the applicant pool and overlook the flagged assignments, assuming the monitoring system may have generated false positives. Option D. Initiate a formal investigation into the flagged assignments, ensuring due process for any students identified as potentially involved, and applying the school's established academic integrity policies. Correct answer is D. Initiate a formal investigation into the flagged assignments, ensuring due process for any students identified as potentially involved, and applying the school's established academic integrity policies. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge in business education, balancing academic integrity with the practical realities of student performance and institutional reputation. The monitoring system's findings raise concerns about potential academic misconduct, which directly impacts the credibility of the Amiens Higher School of Commerce's degrees and the fairness of its admissions process. The challenge lies in responding to these findings in a manner that is both procedurally sound and ethically defensible, upholding the school's commitment to academic excellence and fair evaluation. The correct approach involves a thorough, impartial investigation of the flagged instances. This means gathering all relevant evidence, providing the accused students with an opportunity to respond, and applying the school's established disciplinary procedures consistently. This aligns with fundamental principles of natural justice and due process, ensuring that any sanctions are proportionate and based on verified facts. Ethically, this approach respects the rights of the students while safeguarding the integrity of the institution. It also demonstrates a commitment to transparency and fairness in academic assessment, which is crucial for maintaining trust among students, faculty, and future employers. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the findings without proper investigation. This fails to uphold the school's responsibility to maintain academic standards and could allow misconduct to persist, undermining the value of its qualifications. Ethically, it is a dereliction of duty to ignore potential breaches of academic integrity. Another incorrect approach would be to impose immediate punitive measures without due process. This violates the principles of fairness and could lead to unjust outcomes for students. It also risks damaging the school's reputation if its disciplinary actions are perceived as arbitrary or biased. A further incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the potential negative publicity or impact on rankings, rather than on the substantive issue of academic integrity. This prioritizes external perception over internal ethical obligations and can lead to decisions that are not grounded in fairness or sound academic principles. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a clear understanding of the institution's policies on academic integrity and misconduct. This should be followed by a systematic process of evidence gathering and review. Crucially, it involves affording all parties involved the right to be heard and to present their case. Decisions should be made based on established criteria and applied consistently, with a clear appeals process available. The ultimate goal is to uphold academic standards while ensuring fairness and due process for all students. Question 9. The monitoring system demonstrates that a candidate for the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam has accessed a website containing general study tips for commerce entrance exams, but the exam's specific regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines explicitly state that only materials provided within the exam booklet or authorized by the proctor are permitted. Which of the following actions best reflects adherence to the exam's jurisdiction and ethical principles? Option A. Continue accessing the website as it provides general advice that does not directly answer exam questions, assuming the rules are intended for specific content only. Option B. Assume that since the website is not from another country or jurisdiction, it falls within acceptable parameters as long as it doesn't contain direct answers. Option C. Report the access to the proctor immediately and request guidance on how to proceed, accepting any consequences for the unintentional breach. Option D. Immediately cease accessing any external websites and continue with the exam using only permitted materials, acknowledging the potential for a minor infraction but prioritizing future adherence. The correct answer is D. Immediately cease accessing any external websites and continue with the exam using only permitted materials, acknowledging the potential for a minor infraction but prioritizing future adherence. Explanation. The scenario presents a challenge for a student at the Amiens Higher School of Commerce regarding the ethical implications of academic integrity and the responsible use of information. The core difficulty lies in balancing the desire to perform well on an entrance exam with the obligation to adhere to the exam's strict rules and the principles of academic honesty. The pressure to succeed in a competitive entrance exam can lead to temptations to circumvent established procedures, making careful judgment and a strong ethical compass paramount. The correct approach involves recognizing the limitations and specific instructions of the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam and acting strictly within those boundaries. This means understanding that the exam's regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines are the sole governing principles. The ethical justification for this approach is rooted in the fundamental principle of academic integrity, which requires candidates to present their own unaided work and to respect the rules set forth by the institution. Adhering to the specified jurisdiction's framework ensures fairness to all candidates and upholds the credibility of the examination process. An incorrect approach would be to consult external resources or information not explicitly permitted by the exam's guidelines, even if those resources seem relevant or helpful. This violates the core principle of academic honesty by introducing external influences that could provide an unfair advantage. The regulatory failure lies in disregarding the explicit jurisdictional limitations set by the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam. Ethically, it constitutes a breach of trust and a lack of respect for the examination's integrity. Another incorrect approach would be to interpret the exam's instructions loosely, or to assume that general knowledge or common practices from other contexts are applicable. This demonstrates a failure to engage with the specific regulatory framework provided. The ethical failure here is a lack of diligence and a disregard for the precise requirements of the examination, which can lead to unintentional but still significant breaches of academic integrity. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of all stated rules and guidelines for the specific examination or task. This involves active reading and seeking clarification. If any aspect is ambiguous, professionals must then critically evaluate any potential actions against these established rules, prioritizing adherence to the defined jurisdiction and ethical principles of honesty and fairness. When faced with a choice, the decision that most strictly aligns with the explicit regulatory framework and ethical standards of the context should always be chosen, even if it appears more challenging or less expedient. Question 10. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern of unusual activity associated with a student's academic record that could indicate a potential breach of academic integrity. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the faculty member who discovered this anomaly? Option A. Discuss the observed pattern with other faculty members to get their opinions on the student's behavior. Option B. Ignore the anomaly, assuming it is a minor issue that will resolve itself. Option C. Immediately confront the student with the observed pattern and demand an explanation. Option D. Initiate a confidential internal review process to gather more information and assess the situation. The correct answer is C. Immediately confront the student with the observed pattern and demand an explanation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate a situation where a potential breach of ethical conduct or regulatory compliance has been detected. The core difficulty lies in determining the appropriate response when faced with evidence that might indicate misconduct, balancing the need for thorough investigation with the principles of fairness and due process. Careful judgment is required to avoid premature accusations, ensure all relevant facts are gathered, and adhere to the established procedures of the Amiens Higher School of Commerce. The correct approach involves initiating a formal, confidential internal review process. This aligns with best professional practice by acknowledging the seriousness of the potential issue without causing undue alarm or reputational damage. It allows for a structured investigation, gathering evidence, and providing the individual in question an opportunity to respond, thereby upholding principles of fairness and natural justice, which are implicit in the ethical guidelines expected of students and staff at an institution like the Amiens Higher School of Commerce. This methodical approach ensures that any subsequent actions are based on verified facts and are in line with the school's internal regulations and ethical code. An incorrect approach would be to immediately confront the individual or dismiss the findings without further investigation. Confronting the individual prematurely, without a proper review, could lead to accusations based on incomplete information, potentially causing significant reputational harm and creating a hostile environment. Dismissing the findings without investigation would be a failure to uphold the school's responsibility to maintain ethical standards and could allow a breach of conduct to go unaddressed, undermining the integrity of the institution. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the matter with colleagues who are not directly involved in the review process. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality, which is a fundamental ethical obligation. Such gossip or informal dissemination of information can lead to speculation, damage reputations, and create an environment of distrust, violating the principles of discretion and professional conduct expected within an academic institution. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes fact-finding, adherence to established procedures, and ethical considerations. This involves 1. Recognizing the potential issue and its implication. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and ethical guidelines. 3. Initiating a formal, confidential review process. 4. Gathering all necessary information and evidence objectively. 5. Providing the affected party with an opportunity to be heard. 6. making a decision based on the verified facts and in accordance with established protocols. Question 11. The monitoring system demonstrates a statistically significant correlation between the time spent on a particular section of the entrance exam and the final score achieved by candidates. The system also flags candidates who consistently spend an unusually short or long duration on this section compared to the average. What is the most appropriate course of action for the exam administrator? Option A. Share the aggregated data on time spent versus score with other educational institutions to benchmark their exam performance. Option B. Use the flagged candidates' data to create a preliminary list of potential high achievers and underperformers for targeted follow-up during the admissions process. Option C. Analyze the exam section's difficulty and clarity, and review the time allocation for that section in future exam designs. Without identifying individual candidates. Option D. Identify the candidates who spent an unusually short or long duration on the section, and investigate their individual performance patterns to understand their exam-taking strategies. The correct answer is C. Analyze the exam section's difficulty and clarity, and review the time allocation for that section in future exam designs, without identifying individual candidates. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect sensitive data and ensure fair competition. The Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam, like many professional environments, emphasizes integrity and adherence to established guidelines. Misinterpreting or misusing information obtained through monitoring systems can lead to severe consequences, including reputational damage, disciplinary action, and breaches of trust. Careful judgment is required to discern between legitimate information gathering for academic improvement and unethical exploitation of data. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the monitoring system's data, focusing on identifying patterns and areas for improvement in the exam's design and administration, without revealing specific candidate information or compromising the integrity of future assessments. This aligns with the ethical principles of fairness and objectivity, as well as the implicit regulatory framework governing educational institutions that prioritizes the protection of candidate data and the maintenance of a level playing field. The goal is to enhance the examination process itself, not to gain an unfair advantage or to scrutinize individual performance beyond what is necessary for systemic improvement. An incorrect approach that focuses on identifying specific candidates who performed poorly or exceptionally, with the intent to understand their individual strategies or weaknesses, represents a significant ethical and potentially regulatory failure. This constitutes a breach of candidate privacy and could lead to accusations of bias or unfair scrutiny. Another incorrect approach, which involves sharing aggregated but still identifiable performance trends with external parties, or using this information to predict future candidate success for non-academic purposes, also violates principles of confidentiality and data protection. Such actions undermine the trust placed in the institution and its staff. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols and ethical guidelines. This involves first understanding the purpose and limitations of any monitoring system. Then, one must assess the potential impact of any action taken based on the data, considering both individual and systemic consequences. If there is any doubt about the appropriateness of an action, seeking guidance from supervisors or relevant ethical committees is paramount. The focus should always be on improving processes and maintaining the integrity of the institution, rather than on exploiting data for personal or unfair advantage. Question 12. The audit findings indicate that the company's management has consistently applied an aggressive interpretation of certain accounting standards, leading to the capitalization of expenses that, in the auditor's professional judgment, should have been expensed. Management asserts that these interpretations are permissible under current French accounting regulations and are necessary to present a more accurate financial performance. The auditor has gathered evidence suggesting these capitalized amounts are significant and could materially distort the reported profitability and asset values. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the auditor in this situation? Option A. Immediately issue a disclaimer of opinion due to the potential for material misstatement, without further discussion with management. Option B. Advise management to adjust the financial statements to reflect the auditor's preferred accounting treatment without providing specific regulatory justification, to avoid further conflict. Option C. Discuss the specific accounting treatments with management. Request detailed justifications supported by relevant accounting standards and evidence. And if disagreements persist regarding materiality, propose adjustments or consider the impact on the audit opinion. Option D. Accept management's interpretation and continue with the audit, as their assertions are based on their understanding of French accounting regulations. The correct answer is D. Accept management's interpretation and continue with the audit, as their assertions are based on their understanding of French accounting regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to present a favorable financial picture and the auditor's duty to provide an objective and truthful opinion. The auditor must navigate the pressure to conform to management's expectations while upholding professional skepticism and adhering to the ethical principles and regulatory framework governing the audit profession in France, as applicable to the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam context. The core tension lies in the interpretation of accounting standards and the materiality of identified discrepancies. The correct approach involves a thorough, evidence-based assessment of the identified discrepancies against the relevant French accounting standards, e.g., Plan Comptable Général (PCG), and auditing standards. This includes understanding the nature and magnitude of the misstatements, their potential impact on the financial statements, and the auditor's responsibility to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. If the discrepancies are deemed material, the auditor must insist on their correction. If management refuses, the auditor must consider the implications for their audit opinion, potentially leading to a qualified or adverse opinion, or even withdrawal from the engagement, as dictated by professional ethics and auditing standards. This upholds the auditor's independence and integrity, ensuring the reliability of financial reporting for stakeholders. An incorrect approach would be to accept management's explanations without sufficient corroborating evidence, especially if those explanations are vague or lack objective support. This demonstrates a failure of professional skepticism and could lead to the issuance of an inaccurate audit report, misleading stakeholders. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the discrepancies as immaterial without a rigorous quantitative and qualitative assessment, failing to consider the cumulative effect of individually small misstatements. Furthermore, succumbing to management pressure to overlook the issues to maintain a good client relationship is a direct violation of independence and ethical principles, undermining the entire purpose of the audit. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes professional skepticism, ethical conduct, and adherence to regulatory requirements. This involves 1. Clearly identifying the issue and its potential implications. 2. Gathering sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to support any conclusions. 3. Consulting relevant accounting and auditing standards. 4. Discussing findings with management and seeking their explanations and proposed adjustments. 5. Objectively evaluating the evidence and management's responses. 6. Escalating the issue internally if necessary, e.g., to the audit partner. 7. Determining the appropriate audit opinion based on the evidence and the materiality of any uncorrected misstatements. 8. Communicating findings and conclusions clearly and professionally. Question 13. Upon reviewing preparatory materials for the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam, a student discovers a leaked, unauthorized study guide circulating online that claims to contain questions and answers from previous exams. The student has invested significant time in their own preparation, but feels anxious about the exam's difficulty and the competitive nature of admissions. Which of the following actions best reflects ethical and compliant conduct in this situation? Option A. Disregard the unauthorized study guide and proceed with their own preparation, relying solely on legitimate study resources and their acquired knowledge. Option B. Report the existence of the unauthorized study guide to the examination administrators. Option C. Download and study the unauthorized guide to gain an advantage, believing it will improve their chances of admission. Option D. Share the link to the unauthorized study guide with fellow applicants to help them prepare as well. The correct answer is A. Disregard the unauthorized study guide and proceed with their own preparation, relying solely on legitimate study resources and their acquired knowledge. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a student's desire for academic success and the ethical imperative to uphold academic integrity. The pressure to perform well in a competitive entrance exam, coupled with the temptation of readily available, albeit unauthorized, information, creates a situation where a student's judgment is tested. Navigating this requires a clear understanding of ethical principles and the specific guidelines governing the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam. The correct approach involves recognizing the ethical boundaries and choosing to rely solely on one's own preparation and understanding. This aligns with the fundamental principles of academic honesty, which are implicitly and explicitly enforced by any reputable educational institution's entrance examination. Specifically, the guidelines for the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam, like those of most academic institutions, prohibit any form of cheating or unauthorized assistance. Adhering to these rules ensures a fair evaluation of all candidates and maintains the integrity of the admissions process. By refusing to engage with the unauthorized material, the student upholds their personal integrity and demonstrates the ethical character expected of future business professionals. An incorrect approach would be to utilize the unauthorized study guide. This action constitutes a direct violation of academic integrity rules. Ethically, it is dishonest as it misrepresents the student's own knowledge and effort. From a regulatory perspective, it breaches the explicit or implicit rules of the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam, which are designed to ensure a level playing field. Another incorrect approach would be to share the unauthorized guide with other students. This not only involves the student in academic dishonesty, but also extends it to others, potentially compromising their chances and the integrity of the exam for a wider group. This action demonstrates a disregard for fairness and ethical conduct. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear assessment of the situation against established ethical codes and institutional regulations. Students should ask themselves, does this action align with the principles of honesty and fairness? And does this action comply with the rules of the examination? If the answer to either question is no, the action should be rejected. Developing a strong internal ethical compass, reinforced by an understanding of the specific rules governing academic and professional environments, is crucial for making sound judgments. Question 14. Stakeholder feedback indicates a potential partnership with a multinational corporation that offers significant financial sponsorship for a new research center at the Amiens Higher School of Commerce. However, concerns have been raised regarding the corporation's recent public controversies related to labor practices and environmental impact. The school's leadership is considering how to proceed with evaluating this opportunity. Which approach best balances the school's financial needs with its ethical obligations and reputational integrity? Option A. Conduct a thorough due diligence process to assess the corporation's ethical standing and the potential reputational risks. Engage in open dialogue with stakeholders about the findings, and establish clear ethical guidelines for the partnership before making a final decision. Option B. Accept the sponsorship, but impose strict conditions on the corporation's involvement in the research center's operations and public communications, without fully disclosing the nature of these conditions to all stakeholders. Option C. Proceed with the partnership, focusing on the immediate financial benefits and the prestige of the sponsorship, while downplaying or ignoring the corporation's controversies. Option D. Reject the partnership outright due to the controversy, without further investigation, to avoid any potential association. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the partnership, focusing on the immediate financial benefits and the prestige of the sponsorship, while downplaying or ignoring the corporation's controversies. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial interests of the school with the long-term reputational and ethical obligations towards its students and the broader business community. The Amiens Higher School of Commerce, as an educational institution, has a duty of care and a responsibility to uphold academic integrity and the value of its degrees. The pressure to secure funding can create a conflict of interest, making objective decision-making difficult. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any partnership aligns with the school's core values and mission, rather than compromising them for short-term gain. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and ethical considerations in the partnership evaluation process. This means conducting thorough due diligence on potential partners, ensuring that their business practices align with the school's ethical standards and do not pose a reputational risk. It also involves clearly communicating the rationale for any partnership to all stakeholders, including students, faculty, and alumni, and establishing clear guidelines for how the partnership will operate to avoid conflicts of interest or undue influence on the curriculum or academic standards. This approach is justified by the ethical imperative to maintain academic integrity and the school's reputation, which are fundamental to its long-term success, and the value it provides to its students. Adherence to principles of good governance and responsible corporate citizenship, which are implicitly expected of educational institutions, further supports this approach. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the financial benefits of the partnership fails to acknowledge the school's ethical responsibilities and the potential for reputational damage. This can lead to a loss of trust among students, alumni, and the wider business community, ultimately undermining the school's standing. Another incorrect approach that involves rushing the decision-making process without adequate due diligence risks overlooking critical ethical or operational issues with the potential partner. This haste can result in unforeseen negative consequences that are difficult to rectify. An approach that attempts to conceal the details of the partnership from stakeholders, or that lacks clear communication channels, fosters suspicion and can lead to accusations of impropriety, damaging the school's credibility. These approaches violate the principles of accountability and transparency expected of an educational institution. Professionals in such situations should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. This is followed by a comprehensive assessment of potential risks and benefits, with a strong emphasis on ethical implications and alignment with institutional values. Seeking input from diverse perspectives, including legal counsel and ethics committees, is crucial. Finally, decisions should be documented, clearly communicated, and subject to ongoing review to ensure continued adherence to ethical standards and stakeholder expectations. Question 15. System analysis indicates that a company operating in the French market is facing pressure from its primary investors to significantly cut costs in its manufacturing division to boost quarterly profits. This cost-cutting measure would likely involve reducing employee benefits and potentially relocating some operations to a region with lower labor costs, which could lead to local job losses. The company's management is considering how to respond to this investor demand, while also considering its broader responsibilities. Which of the following approaches best reflects a professional and ethically sound decision-making process within the French regulatory and business context? Option A. Reject the cost-cutting measures outright and commit to maintaining current employee benefits and local operations, prioritizing employee welfare and community stability above all else. Option B. Implement the cost-cutting measures immediately as requested by investors to maximize shareholder value, as this is the primary legal obligation of the company's management. Option C. Engage in a comprehensive stakeholder dialogue to understand the impact of potential cost-cutting measures on employees, the local community, and suppliers, and explore alternative cost-saving strategies that mitigate negative consequences while still addressing investor concerns about financial performance. Option D. Publicly announce a commitment to sustainability and ethical practices, while privately proceeding with the cost-cutting measures to satisfy investors, hoping that the positive public image will offset any negative repercussions. The correct answer is B. Implement the cost-cutting measures immediately as requested by investors to maximize shareholder value, as this is the primary legal obligation of the company's management. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in business ethics and stakeholder management, particularly relevant for aspiring professionals from institutions like the Amiens Higher School of Commerce. The core difficulty lies in balancing the immediate financial interests of shareholders with the broader, long-term sustainability and ethical obligations towards other stakeholders, such as employees, the local community, and the environment. Navigating this requires a nuanced understanding of corporate social responsibility, CSR, and the legal and ethical frameworks that govern business conduct in France, as implied by the exam's origin. The pressure to deliver short-term profits can often conflict with investments in sustainable practices or employee well-being, creating a complex decision-making environment. The correct approach prioritizes a holistic view of the company's impact and responsibilities. It recognizes that long-term value creation is intrinsically linked to maintaining positive relationships with all stakeholders. This perspective aligns with modern corporate governance principles and French legal and ethical expectations, which increasingly emphasize sustainability and social responsibility. Specifically, French law, through various articles of the Commercial Code and specific legislation on environmental and social reporting, encourages or mandates consideration of stakeholder interests beyond just shareholders. Ethical frameworks also support this, advocating for a stakeholder-centric model where decisions are made considering the well-being of all affected parties, thereby fostering trust and long-term viability. An incorrect approach that solely focuses on maximizing immediate shareholder returns, without considering the potential negative externalities on other stakeholders, is professionally challenging because it can lead to reputational damage, legal repercussions, and ultimately, a decline in long-term profitability. Ethically, it violates principles of fairness and corporate citizenship. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes employee welfare to the detriment of all other stakeholders, while seemingly altruistic, can also be professionally problematic if it leads to the company's insolvency or inability to meet its contractual obligations to suppliers or creditors, thereby harming a wider group. A third incorrect approach that attempts to appease all stakeholders superficially without genuine commitment to sustainable change risks being perceived as disingenuous, potentially leading to distrust and backlash from all groups. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough stakeholder analysis to identify all parties affected by a decision and their respective interests. This should be followed by an assessment of the potential impacts of different courses of action on each stakeholder group, considering both short-term and long-term consequences. The decision should then be evaluated against relevant legal obligations, ethical principles, and the company's stated values and CSR commitments. Transparency and open communication with stakeholders are also crucial throughout the process. Question 16. Examination of the data shows that while the overall pass rate for the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam has remained stable, there has been a slight but consistent decline in the performance of candidates from a specific demographic group over the past 3 admission cycles. The admissions committee is preparing its annual report for stakeholders, including prospective students, parents, and partner institutions. The pressure is on to present a positive overall picture of the exam's effectiveness and the school's selectivity. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the ethical and professional standards expected of the Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam in presenting this data? Option A. Reevaluate the scoring methodology for the specific demographic group to identify potential adjustments that could bring their performance metrics closer to the overall average, ensuring a more uniform presentation of results. Option B. Highlight the stable overall pass rate and focus on the positive aspects of the admissions process, omitting any mention of the declining performance in the specific demographic group to avoid any perception of bias or underperformance. Option C. Present the overall stable pass rate as the primary indicator of the exam's success, while briefly mentioning the decline in the specific demographic group as a minor observation without further analysis or context in the main report. Option D. Provide a comprehensive analysis of the exam results, including the stable overall pass rate, and transparently report the observed decline in the specific demographic group, offering potential contributing factors and outlining planned investigations or interventions to address this trend. The correct answer is C. Present the overall stable pass rate as the primary indicator of the exam's success, while briefly mentioning the decline in the specific demographic group as a minor observation without further analysis or context in the main report. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive public perception and the ethical obligation to disclose accurate and complete information, particularly when dealing with sensitive data related to student performance and institutional reputation. The Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam, like any reputable educational institution, operates under a framework that prioritizes transparency, fairness, and the integrity of its admissions process. The challenge lies in navigating the pressure to present data favorably without misrepresenting the reality of student outcomes or the effectiveness of the admissions criteria. Careful judgment is required to balance stakeholder expectations with regulatory and ethical imperatives. The correct approach involves a commitment to data integrity and transparent reporting, even when the data might not present the most flattering picture. This means acknowledging limitations, contextualizing results, and avoiding selective presentation of information. This aligns with the ethical principles of honesty and accountability expected of educational institutions and their admissions processes. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit of fair competition and informed decision-making for prospective students and other stakeholders. The regulatory framework governing educational institutions, while not explicitly detailed here, implicitly supports such transparency to ensure fair access and prevent misleading claims. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on highlighting positive trends while omitting or downplaying negative ones represents a failure of transparency and potentially misleading stakeholders. This can erode trust and create an inaccurate perception of the institution's performance or the value of its admissions process. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate reputational gain over long-term data accuracy risks violating ethical standards of honesty and could lead to future scrutiny or reputational damage if the selective reporting is discovered. A third incorrect approach that involves manipulating data or framing it in a way that obscures the true picture is a direct breach of ethical conduct and could have legal ramifications if it constitutes misrepresentation. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a thorough understanding of the data, its potential interpretations, and the ethical and regulatory obligations. Professionals should ask, is the data presented in a complete and unbiased manner? Does it accurately reflect the situation? Are there any potential misinterpretations that need to be proactively addressed? The focus should always be on providing stakeholders with the information they need to make informed judgments, upholding the integrity of the institution and its processes. Question 17. Assessment of how a company's annual report should communicate its financial performance to stakeholders, considering the ethical imperative for transparency and the potential for stakeholder misinterpretation. Option A. Emphasize only the most positive financial highlights and success stories, while minimizing or omitting any mention of challenges or underperforming segments. Option B. Focus predominantly on optimistic future projections and potential growth opportunities, with minimal reference to the current year's actual financial outcomes. Option C. Utilize highly technical financial jargon and complex statistical data to showcase the sophistication of the company's financial management, assuming stakeholders can interpret it. Option D. Present a comprehensive overview of the company's financial results, including both positive achievements and areas requiring improvement, using clear and accessible language. The correct answer is D. Present a comprehensive overview of the company's financial results, including both positive achievements and areas requiring improvement, using clear and accessible language. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to present a positive image and the ethical obligation to provide accurate and transparent information to potential investors and the public. The Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam, in its regulatory framework, emphasizes integrity, ethical conduct, and responsible business practices. Therefore, any approach that prioritizes superficial positive framing over factual representation would be considered professionally unsound and potentially violate ethical guidelines related to transparency and honesty in financial reporting and corporate communication. The correct approach involves a balanced and truthful presentation of the company's performance, acknowledging both successes and challenges. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and ethical communication, which are implicitly expected in the context of a business school entrance exam. By providing a comprehensive overview, stakeholders can make informed decisions based on a realistic understanding of the company's situation. This approach fosters trust and long-term credibility, which are paramount in the business world. An approach that focuses solely on highlighting positive achievements while downplaying or omitting negative aspects is ethically flawed. It misleads stakeholders by creating an incomplete and potentially deceptive picture of the company's reality. This can lead to poor investment decisions and damage the company's reputation if the omitted information later comes to light. Such an approach violates the principle of full disclosure and can be seen as a form of misrepresentation. Another incorrect approach is to present overly technical or jargon-filled information without clear explanations. While accuracy is important, the goal of corporate communication is to be understood by a diverse audience, including those who may not be financial experts. Failing to communicate effectively hinders informed decision-making and can be perceived as an attempt to obscure unfavorable details or to appear more sophisticated than the company's actual performance warrants. This lacks transparency and can erode stakeholder confidence. Finally, an approach that relies heavily on future projections without grounding them in current performance or realistic assumptions is also problematic. While forward-looking statements are common, they must be presented responsibly and with appropriate caveats. An overemphasis on optimistic future scenarios without a solid foundation in present realities can be misleading and create unrealistic expectations, ultimately leading to disappointment and a loss of trust. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a commitment to honesty, transparency, and a stakeholder-centric perspective. Professionals must critically evaluate the information they are presenting, considering its potential impact on all stakeholders. They should strive for clarity and accuracy, ensuring that both positive and negative aspects are communicated in a balanced and understandable manner. When in doubt, erring on the side of greater transparency and seeking advice from ethics or legal counsel is a prudent course of action. Question 18. Which approach would be most appropriate for a rapidly growing e-commerce startup based in France, aiming to expand its market share across the European Union, when faced with an opportunity to acquire a smaller competitor whose financial statements might not fully reflect certain contingent liabilities, and where speed is a critical factor in securing the deal before competitors? Option A. Seek to acquire only the profitable assets of the competitor, leaving the contingent liabilities with the original entity, and then rebrand and relaunch the services to avoid any association with past issues. Option B. Conduct a thorough due diligence process, engaging legal and financial experts to meticulously identify and quantify all contingent liabilities, and negotiate terms that adequately protect the acquiring company, even if this significantly delays the acquisition timeline. Option C. Prioritize securing the acquisition by leveraging aggressive negotiation tactics and highlighting the strategic benefits to the seller, while downplaying the potential risks associated with the contingent liabilities to expedite the process. Option D. Proceed with the acquisition as quickly as possible, focusing on securing the deal and addressing any potential liabilities post-acquisition through internal restructuring and negotiation with the acquired company's former stakeholders. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the acquisition as quickly as possible, focusing on securing the deal and addressing any potential liabilities post-acquisition through internal restructuring and negotiation with the acquired company's former stakeholders. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for rapid growth and the ethical and regulatory obligations to ensure fair and transparent dealings with all stakeholders. The Amiens Higher School of Commerce entrance exam emphasizes a strong understanding of business ethics and regulatory compliance, particularly within the French and European Union frameworks that govern commercial practices. A candidate must demonstrate an ability to balance commercial objectives with legal and ethical responsibilities. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparent communication and adherence to established legal frameworks, even if it means a slower pace of expansion. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the French Commercial Code, Code de Commerce, which mandates honesty and good faith in business transactions. Specifically, Article L121-1 of the Code de Commerce prohibits misleading commercial practices, and Article L410-1 emphasizes the importance of fair competition. Furthermore, EU regulations on consumer protection and fair trading would also be highly relevant, ensuring that any expansion does not exploit information asymmetry or mislead potential partners or customers. This approach upholds the long-term reputation and sustainability of the company. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on aggressive market penetration without adequate disclosure or consideration for regulatory compliance would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to violations of competition law, consumer protection directives, and potentially even fraud charges. For instance, misrepresenting the capabilities or financial health of the company to secure partnerships or investments would violate principles of contractual good faith and could be deemed fraudulent under French law. Another incorrect approach, which involves seeking loopholes in regulations rather than adhering to their spirit, demonstrates a lack of ethical integrity and a disregard for the broader societal impact of business decisions. This can lead to significant legal penalties and reputational damage, undermining the trust essential for long-term business success. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. This is followed by a thorough assessment of the legal and ethical implications of each potential course of action, referencing specific regulations and ethical codes. The chosen strategy should then be one that maximizes long-term value for all stakeholders, while ensuring full compliance with all applicable laws and ethical standards. This involves a proactive approach to risk management, anticipating potential legal or ethical challenges, and developing mitigation strategies. Question 19. Implementation of a new admissions policy at the Amiens Higher School of Commerce requires careful consideration of stakeholder interests. A prominent alumnus has contacted the admissions office, strongly recommending a candidate for admission and highlighting their potential contributions to the school's network. The candidate's academic record is strong but not exceptional, and they have not yet met one of the secondary admission criteria. The admissions team must decide how to proceed. Which of the following approaches best upholds the integrity and fairness of the admissions process? Option A. Grant the candidate an interview and prioritize their application for admission based on the influential alumnus's recommendation, assuming their potential contributions will outweigh any minor academic deficiencies. Option B. Advise the alumnus that the candidate's application will be reviewed according to standard procedures, but proceed to inform the admissions committee to be lenient with the secondary admission criterion due to the alumnus's influence. Option C. Inform the admissions committee of the alumnus's request and suggest they give the candidate special consideration during the review process to foster a positive relationship with the alumnus. Option D. Conduct a thorough and objective review of the candidate's application against all established admission criteria, including the secondary criterion, and make a decision based solely on merit and adherence to policy, regardless of the alumnus's recommendation. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough and objective review of the candidate's application against all established admission criteria, including the secondary criterion, and make a decision based solely on merit and adherence to policy, regardless of the alumnus's recommendation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the Amiens Higher School of Commerce, as an educational institution, has a responsibility to uphold its academic integrity and reputation. This involves ensuring that all admissions processes are fair, transparent, and adhere to the established guidelines. The challenge lies in balancing the desire to support a promising candidate with the imperative to follow the rules, especially when those rules are designed to ensure equal opportunity and prevent undue influence. Careful judgment is required to navigate the potential for perceived favoritism or bias. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective review of the candidate's application against the established admission criteria, without any external pressure or special consideration. This aligns with the ethical principles of fairness and meritocracy, which are fundamental to academic institutions. Specifically, adhering strictly to the published admission criteria ensures that all applicants are evaluated on the same basis, preventing any appearance of impropriety or preferential treatment. This upholds the integrity of the admissions process and maintains the trust of all stakeholders, including prospective students, current students, faculty, and the wider community. An incorrect approach would be to grant the candidate an interview solely based on the recommendation of a prominent alumnus, without a prior assessment of their academic qualifications against the standard entry requirements. This fails to uphold the principle of equal opportunity, as it suggests that connections can override objective evaluation. It also risks undermining the credibility of the admissions process, potentially leading to accusations of favoritism and damaging the school's reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to inform the admissions committee about the alumnus's request and ask them to give the candidate special consideration during the review. This directly introduces bias into the decision-making process. It violates the principle of objective assessment and can lead to the admission of less qualified candidates, compromising the academic standards of the institution. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to dismiss the candidate's application outright because they did not meet a minor, non-essential criterion, without considering the overall strength of their profile or the possibility of a waiver if such provisions exist. While adherence to rules is important, an overly rigid application of minor rules without considering the spirit of the admissions policy can be detrimental and may not reflect a holistic evaluation of the candidate's potential. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. understanding and strictly adhering to the published admission policies and procedures. 2. Objectively evaluating all candidates based on the defined criteria. 3. Recognizing and managing potential conflicts of interest or undue influence. 4. Maintaining transparency and fairness throughout the process. 5. Documenting all decisions and the rationale behind them. 6. Seeking guidance from senior management or relevant committees if ambiguity or ethical dilemmas arise. Question 20. System analysis indicates that a member of the admissions committee at the Amiens Higher School of Commerce has a close personal friend applying for admission. The committee member is aware of this relationship and the potential for this to influence their judgment. Considering the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines governing university admissions in France, which of the following actions best upholds the integrity of the entrance exam process? Option A. The committee member should proceed with evaluating the applicant's file as they believe they can remain objective, given their professional experience. Option B. The committee member should ask a trusted colleague on the committee to review the applicant's file and provide an assessment without informing the colleague of the personal relationship. Option C. The committee member should subtly advocate for the applicant during committee discussions, emphasizing their positive attributes to ensure a fair consideration. Option D. The committee member should immediately declare the conflict of interest to the admissions committee chair and recuse themselves from evaluating the applicant's file and participating in any discussions or decisions regarding their admission. The correct answer is D. The committee member should immediately declare the conflict of interest to the admissions committee chair and recuse themselves from evaluating the applicant's file and participating in any discussions or decisions regarding their admission. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical imperative of transparency and the potential for conflicts of interest within a business context, specifically concerning the Amiens Higher School of Commerce's entrance exam framework. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for objective assessment with the influence of personal relationships, which could compromise the integrity of the selection process. Careful judgment is required to uphold the school's reputation and ensure fairness to all applicants. The correct approach involves a strict adherence to the Amiens Higher School of Commerce's stated admissions policies and ethical guidelines. This means recusing oneself from any part of the decision-making process where a conflict of interest exists, such as evaluating an applicant who is a close personal acquaintance. This approach is justified by the fundamental principles of fairness, impartiality, and the avoidance of perceived or actual bias, which are paramount in any competitive selection process governed by institutional regulation. Upholding these principles ensures that the admissions process is seen as legitimate and equitable by all stakeholders, including applicants, faculty, and the wider academic community. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with evaluating the applicant without disclosure. This failure stems from a disregard for the ethical obligation to declare conflicts of interest. Such an action undermines the integrity of the admissions process by introducing the possibility of undue influence, even if no conscious bias is present. It violates the spirit of fair competition and could lead to a perception of favoritism, damaging the school's credibility. Another incorrect approach is to delegate the evaluation to a colleague without informing them of the personal connection. While this might seem like a way to avoid direct involvement, it is still ethically problematic. It fails to address the potential for subtle, unconscious bias to influence the colleague's assessment or for the relationship to be discovered later, leading to questions about the transparency of the process. It also shifts the burden of managing the conflict without fully resolving it. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to subtly influence the evaluation process in favor of the acquaintance, perhaps by highlighting their strengths in a way that might not be objectively warranted or by downplaying their weaknesses. This is a direct violation of ethical principles and institutional regulations, as it constitutes an attempt to manipulate the outcome of the assessment for personal reasons, thereby compromising the meritocratic basis of the admission. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the institution's ethical code and admissions policies. When a potential conflict of interest arises, the professional must first identify it. Then, they should consult the relevant guidelines to determine the appropriate course of action, which typically involves disclosure and recusal. If there is any ambiguity, seeking guidance from a supervisor or the relevant ethics committee is crucial. The ultimate goal is to ensure that all decisions are made impartially and in accordance with established standards, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the institution and its processes.